All right, we are in week 2 of our series, Haters. Last week, we discussed the story of Jesus and the woman caught in the act of adultery. Does anybody remember the bottom line? It was a pretty memorable bottom line. Does anybody remember it?
Don't drop the rock.
No, drop the rock. We do want you to drop the rock. Don't cast stones, don't judge others. Right. Our leaders are right now passing out cards and pens. I noticed a few of you guys were taking notes last week. Note takers are history makers. That's what I've always been taught. And so if you want to follow on, take notes what's on the screen, you guys can do that. If that helps you remember things better. I know that I don't remember much unless I've written it down. So if you want to write down notes, you can do that. If you've watched more than a few movies, you've probably seen all kinds of tropes. Like, what in the world is a trope? Raise your hand if you've heard the word trope before. A trope. All right. A trope, which is, most of you didn't raise your hand. A trope is basically a concept or stereotype that the audience automatically understands. For instance, the hero gets the girl at the end of the movie, right? Or there's a bomb, and the timer's running down to just a few seconds, and at the last second, the guy that's a hero saving somebody always disarms it, and there's always only like 2 or 3 seconds left, right? We know that trope. Or the bad person, the bad boy, at the end of the movie, turns out to be a good guy. Who would have thought it, right? These are tropes in movies that we know about Hollywood. They love doing these kind of things. This kind of stereotyping doesn't just happen in movies. In fact, we do it all the time in our real lives. In middle school, high school, and adults do it too. We look at someone or observe what they say and do, and we immediately categorize who they are. We see, for instance, the nerdy guy who slays at calculus. And automatically that assumption is, I bet he's not too good at sports, right? Or the guy who lives at the gym rat. I bet you that guy does not slay at calculus. Or the girl with the perfect clothes, the perfect hair, the perfect Instagram, seems to have a perfect everything. Because she has everything going for her, we a lot of times assume we assume that she's a what kind of a girl a lot of times? Mean girl? Yeah? Oh, she's got everything together? I bet she's a mean girl. We all do this, whether it's the guy who constantly plays video games, the girl who parties every weekend, the guy who seems to be a player, or anyone else. We see behaviors or characteristics and think we have someone already figured out. Yep, I already know where this guy's going. I can already guess what he's going to do. Interestingly, our assumptions about people tend to be towards the negative. Think about it. When we see that girl with we stereotype and say, oh, she's got the perfect life. We always think that. We're probably not going to say about that girl, man, I bet she's a really nice person who volunteers at a charity on the weekend. We don't usually say these kind of things when we're making assumptions about people. Or the gym dude. We don't see him and think, you know, that guy that lives at the gym, I bet you he has a 4.0. I bet you he's just an amazing guy. I bet you he plays the violins on the weekends. We don't really usually do that. We don't think positive things about people like that. No way. And why do we assume the worst? I think we do it for 2 reasons. Number one is, and you can write this down, classifying people into tropes or stereotypes, it's easier. Because, you know, we see people like this and we're going, hey, it's hard to know someone right away, and so when you meet someone, you're like, I've met a guy like this before. I know what they're usually like, right? And so we like to put them in neat categories in our minds. And so a lot of times, that's why we do it. It's just easier. It's how our minds work. Or number two, we've seen this movie before. All right? When you meet somebody, and you're like, oh, this person, they're in all of these things. I bet you anything they like doing fill in the blank, whatever it is. Because I've met a person that's very similar to that guy or that girl, and they always do those things. They're always into that, or they're always like that. We make assumptions like that. We know how the story goes because many times before that's exactly how it's gone with the same kind of characters. But when we automatically assume that someone is bad, we might just be in the process of becoming a villain ourselves. We might be becoming haters when we use tropes and assumptions about people. Putting people in categories has been going on since, well, forever, pretty much. And you've seen the problem with it, right? You've seen your assumptions be wrong, or you've experienced people do it to you. Like if somebody turns it out on you, makes an assumption about you, and you're like, wait, you don't even know me. Why are you making an assumption about me? That's the problem with a trope. It isn't always true. The characters aren't always who you think they are. Now that's exactly what happens to a woman in the Old Testament named Rahab. But before we tell her story, let's set the scene. So, the people of God, the Hebrews, thousands of years ago, thousands of years even before Jesus, they were in the modern country of Israel, the promised land. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Jacob's son, Joseph, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, his brothers. Remember, he had 11 brothers. There's 12 sons. Do you guys that grew up in church remember what happened to Joseph? Right? Got sold into slavery by his own brothers. That's right. Went down to Egypt as a slave. Spent years in prison. Did nothing wrong. But eventually God blessed him, and he became the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. Second only power to Pharaoh himself. However, another Pharaoh came to power who didn't know Joseph, and they ended up enslaving the Jewish people, the Hebrews. And they became slaves in Egypt for centuries. However, there was a great deliverer, Moses. Most of you guys have probably heard of him before. Moses the deliverer. So God used Moses to free their people. Let my people go to Pharaoh. You've heard the story. And he sent them on a journey to a new land that would become their new home. And because God had promised the Israelites this amazing new land, which actually was their old land that belonged to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this promised land, they decided to call it the Promised Land, because it was promised by God that they would return there. And the trip back from Egypt to the Promised Land was epic. If you grew up in church, you know the story. God did amazing things. He split the Red Sea so the Israelites could walk through and then close it on the pursuing Egyptians behind them in their chariots. They received the 10 Commandments. God miraculously gave them food and water. Just to name a few of the epic things that happened on their journey to the Promised Land. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, that journey to the Promised Land lasted 40 years. That's a long journey. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really like being in a car for more than 2 hours. So, I'll give props to the Israelites for hanging in there for 40 years. So, needless to say, this was not your typical road trip. With all the Hebrews experienced during this trip, they were ready to finally be home. But, once they arrived in the Promised Land, they're finally here. There's only one problem. Hundreds of years before, it was their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's land. They were the ones that were there. But in the centuries between that, while they were slaves in Egypt, there were 7 new people groups living in the Promised Land. That's difficult. 7 entire nations. So Joshua, which was Moses' successor, sent a couple of spies across the border to do some recon work in the city of Jericho, located in the land that God had promised them. But the spies got caught. They got found out, so they had to go to Plan B, which meant they had to hide inside Jericho, behind enemy lines, enemy territory. A resident of the city, a woman named Rahab, offered her house as a place to hide until the spies could sneak out. And that's where we're going to pick up the story in Joshua chapter 2. It should be on the screen if you didn't bring your Bible. Joshua chapter 2, verses 2 through 6. Here it goes. But someone told the king of Jericho, "Some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab. "Bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land." Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but she replied, "Yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went, but if you hurry, you can probably catch up with them." Check this out. Actually, she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them beneath bundles of flax she had laid out. So Rahab not only hid the Israelite spies that were there to destroy her city, but then she lied to the king to protect them. If you think through this, she's actually risking her life to do this. Think about it. How did the king know that the spies were in her house? Somebody must have saw. They saw them go into the house and they reported it to the king. So she is risking her life to do this. That is an incredibly brave and generous thing to do for people she met 5 minutes ago, who were there to destroy her city. And this noble act instantly made her a hero in the story. Wonderful story, right? That's awesome. But the Bible also provides another detail about Rahab. Let's back up a few verses, back to verse 1. Go back, guys. Back. Here we go. Look, that was it. So the two men, the spies, set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night. Did you catch that? What her occupation was? Rahab was a prostitute. Not exactly the kind of person you would think would be a Bible hero. That is exactly what she was. And the author makes it a point to tell us how she made a living. Like, why would he put that in there? It's because her story didn't end there. If we read on in the book of Joshua, we find out that the army of God, the Israelites, marched around the city for a week. And if you grew up in church, you probably heard this story before. What happened to the walls of Jericho? The seventh day, they came tumbling down, right? God had a great victory over their enemies. But the only people in Jericho who survived were Rahab and her family. The only ones that were spared because she helped God's people. Now you need to know some context. It was typical back then. I mean, ancient warfare was brutal. And it was common that when an army would conquer a city, they would kill everyone in it, men, women, and children. So it was kind of amazing that Joshua decides to spare Rahab and her family. But she was an exceptional hero. Joshua knew that, so he spared her. But that's actually not the last time we hear of Rahab. And this is amazing. If we fast forward thousands of years into the New Testament, Rahab's name appears once again in the Bible. This time it's in a genealogy. A genealogy is kind of like a family tree. However, it's not just anyone's genealogy that we find Rahab the prostitute. It was actually in the family line of Jesus himself. The book of Matthew is one of the 4 books of the Bible that tells the life of Jesus, known as the Gospels. And Matthew starts the story of Jesus' life in a unique way. He traces Jesus' family origin. See, genealogies were a huge deal in this culture because your status a lot of times depended on who your father was and who your grandfather was in that culture. So Matthew was writing with a Jewish audience in mind, and so he was trying to prove Jesus' ties to the Jewish people, prove his Jewishness by saying this is where he was. And we find that Jesus' family line through Mary and Joseph, that he was a direct descendant of King David himself. And the reason Matthew lists this genealogy at the beginning of his Gospel is he was basically proving that Jesus was who he claimed to be. The promised Messiah, the Savior, the Christ, the Son of God. And do you know whose name you'll find on the list? Rahab. You can check it out after the service. Her name is in the family line. She was the great, I don't know how many, great-grandmother of not only King David, but of Jesus himself. That's crazy, right? A prostitute is in the family line of Jesus Christ. Now, you would think Matthew might want to kind of just skip over Rahab, just skip a generation, just go on to the next grandmother in the line. But he doesn't. She's there. You can look yourself and see that Rahab is in the family line of Jesus. Now, why wouldn't he do that? Why would he put her in there? Why did God decide to put Rahab in there? And it's funny because just a few months ago, my mom and I actually discussed this. That's not usually something you hear at churches. You don't talk too much about Rahab the prostitute being a great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus, but she was. We don't talk about it a lot. It's not something that a lot of people know that grew up in church. I didn't hear about it growing up. But my mom and me were talking about, like, how crazy is this? Why would God want this? Simply put, I think it's to shatter our categories of people. To show that what we assume about others isn't always true. That what we think about God, and God, why aren't you doing this in my life? Because this would make a lot of sense to me if you did this in my life. Why aren't you doing things in the way that I think you should do them? Because God's ways are not our ways. God doesn't do the things that we always think He should. The truth is, we don't know where someone's story started or what will happen next in their life. We can't rely on our assumptions about who they are. A non-Jewish prostitute was in the Jewish family line of Jesus, the Son of God. What? No one saw that happening because no one knew her story. This holds such a big truth for us today in 2018. God, I want you to catch this, guys. God does not judge people by appearances. He does not determine our value based on what we do or say. He doesn't limit our potential to our worst choices. Instead, He looks at who we truly are. Who He created us to be. He sees what is possible in our whole story, not just the here and now of us in middle school or high school. This is great news because no matter what your reputation is at your school, it doesn't tell your whole story. It doesn't define who you are. It doesn't tell what your future is going to be. There's so much more to who you are than the assumptions other people make about you. Here's our application for tonight. The same is true of every person around you. How do you apply this message this week, tomorrow at school? The people around you at school have a bigger story than just what you observe during your third period class. Their reputation doesn't even begin to tell you who that person really is. Because of that, I want to challenge you guys with two big ideas for tonight. They're our bottom line. Check them on the screen. Here it is. Assume the best and trust God with the rest. It rhymes. It's pretty easy to remember. Go ahead and say it to your neighbor. Assume the best and trust God with the rest. Now let's break down the bottom line. First part, assume the best. Assuming the best about other people instead of the worst. Not all judgments have to be negative. You can choose to look at people, even people who make decisions you disagree with, and choose to assume good things about them, not just bad things. Just like you, they are so much more than what you see. Like you, they have a story with a background. We talked about this last week. See their story. And besides just being a nice thing to do, assuming the best about people can also keep us from growing cynical. You guys know what a cynic is? Having a bad attitude about people in general. Being cynical is a miserable, unhappy, and lonely way to live. Cynical people are well on their way to being professional haters. Being cynical doesn't happen overnight. It grows over time. Catch this. One of the best ways to avoid becoming a lifetime hater is to choose, little by little, day by day. Remember last week we talked about practical baby steps. So tomorrow at school, rather than tearing that person down, catch yourself and go, well, yeah, they're struggling right now, but I can see that they might be able to turn that around and change that behavior. Little by little. It doesn't have to be a massive change. You don't have to be perfect right away and like, okay, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to judge anyone again. No, baby steps. Making intentional choices over and over again every day to assume the best instead of the worst about the people around you. So that's number one. Number two, trust God with the rest. Trust God with the rest. This is the part where you get to hand over your membership, your hater membership card. Not doing that anymore. Hand it over that card. And let God be God. Because when you assume the best about someone, it doesn't mean that they'll never let you down. It doesn't mean that they'll never disappoint you again. It doesn't mean that they'll always make wise choices, that they'll always be the perfect friend. No, they're people. They have a sin nature like you and I. So they're going to mess up. But remember, what you see in them is just a part of who they really are. And your job is not to manage the 10% of their story that you can see. Your job is to let God manage the 90% of that person that you can't see. See their potential. Don't just see who they are in middle or high school today in the lunchroom. It's like an iceberg. I don't know if you guys know about an iceberg. A lot of times icebergs, a lot of the times you can only see about 10% of them. 90% is beneath the surface. That's the way it is with people. People at your school who drive you nuts, don't judge them based on just what happened this week in school. Let God manage the 90% that you can't see, the potential they have. God knows a person's past. He knows what they're going through today, and He sees their future. What do we see? Just today, they really ticked me off in class today. That's all we can see. So doesn't it make sense to trust the one God who knows a person's whole story? He sees their past, present, and future. We only see the present. Trusting God lets you move from being a hater to knowing it's handled. I don't have to worry about that person drives me nuts. You don't have to be a hater. Leave it to God. Let God deal with it. God, I don't know how God's going to use this person. I can't imagine what they're going to be, but God's got it. I don't have to worry about it. It allows you to believe that there may be more to their future story than you could possibly know. And you might be like, Pastor Adam, you don't know that there's some really nasty kids in my school. Rahab was a prostitute. I'm pretty sure none of the kids in your class are prostitutes, all right? I hope not. So, as bad as she was, imagine what her reputation in Jericho was. Pretty sure most people in Jericho gave up on Rahab. But God envisioned something bigger and better for her and used her past to communicate a powerful message to a group of first-century believers of the book of Matthew. But also to millions of other Christians throughout history, including in this room in Dallas, Texas in 2018. We're still talking about her. And remember what a hero she was. How God turned her story around and used her in a powerful way. And not only that, allowed her to become an ancestor of not only King David, but Jesus Christ Himself. The message of Rahab is a message of hope and possibility, no matter what your past looks like. In response today, as you leave tonight, I want you guys to think of some people that you've put in a category. Maybe at your school, your sports team, don't know, your club, whatever it is. And then I want you to think about what it would look like to assume the best in them instead of the worst. How would a positive assumption change how you treat them? What impact could that have on their life? And what would it be like to realize that while you don't know their entire story, you can trust the one who does know their entire story? So make a choice this week to assume the best. What's the rest of it? And trust God with the rest. I'm going to invite the worship team back to stage and our adult leaders to the front of the stage as well. In a couple minutes, we're going to close with a song. Prayer is something that's central in my life. It's very important to me. Just this morning, as I was driving to church from Frisco, I was praying for you guys, actually. That's a key thing for me. And prayer is a priority in our ministry. So, in response, if you need prayer, you can come talk with the leader during the closing song. Guys with guy leaders, girls with girl leaders. If there's a line, you can just wait. We're going to make sure everybody gets prayed for. If you feel led to pray for a friend, you can do that also during the song. Mama Donna leads our prayer team, so if you're interested in joining, you can talk to her after the service before you leave. Also, if you have a prayer request that's private and you don't want to share with anybody but me, you can actually leave it in the prayer jar in the back. It's on the back table back there. When the song ends, I'll come up and close in prayer. Before we end today, we always want to close messages with the gospel, the good news, greatest news that's ever been told. We know not everybody in this room has accepted Christ as their Savior, so we always want to make sure we present an opportunity to say yes to Jesus. So if there's never been a time in your life, maybe you grew up in church, but never been a time where you said yes to Jesus, to take the place of your sin, to accept as your personal Savior, you can do that today, right now. See, God came up with a great rescue plan for our sin problem, and that was sending His Son to earth 2,000 years ago to be born As a baby, God was skin on him. He grew up and he lived a perfect, sinless life. As adults, he chose to fulfill his mission. He sacrificed his life and died a brutal, agonizing death on a Roman cross. He did that for you, because he loves you. He took the penalty that you deserved as a guilty sinner, even though he was innocent and perfect. The story doesn't end with his death. On the third day, the Bible tells us God raised Jesus from the dead, defeating Satan and death once and for all, and offering all of us a chance to escape our fate as guilty sinners. But only if you take a step of faith. So you just going to church, just being baptized as a little kid, being in a Christian family. The Bible never says that's going to get you to heaven. The only way to get to heaven is by placing your faith in Jesus and saying yes to him. We do that what we call praying the sinner's prayer. Jesus is alive and he ascended to heaven 2,000 years ago and he sits at the right hand of his Father and he wants you to join him there today. But first you need to take a step of faith. If you don't know where you're going to spend eternity, if you were to die tonight and you don't know where you go, heaven or hell, don't leave this room without knowing for sure. You can have complete certainty that when you die, you're spending eternity with Jesus in heaven. If you want to do that, all you need to do is silently repeat the words I'm about to pray. Go ahead and close your eyes, bow your head. If you've never done this before, if you've never said Jesus and it wasn't your choice alone, and you want to say yes to Jesus, make today the most important day of your life, all you need to do is silently repeat these words. You mean them in your heart. Ready? Here we go. Dear Jesus, I know that I'm a sinner and that I need a Savior. Jesus, I believe that you died on the cross for my sin. Raised from the dead on the third day. Jesus, I accept you today as my personal Savior. Save me. Forgive me of my sin. Change me. And help me to live for you every day for the rest of my life. Amen. All eyes closed, no one looking around. If you prayed that prayer for the first time with me and you meant it, I don't want you to be ashamed of your faith. I want you to be proud of it. It's the most important decision you'll ever make. It's more important than where you go to college, what job you'll have. Adults think are more important than who you marry. It's the only decision that lasts this life and the next. All eyes closed, no one looking around. Look down, guys. Close your eyes. No one looking around. We're not going to embarrass anyone. But if you prayed that prayer, no students are looking around. All eyes are closed. If you prayed that prayer with me, and count through. Would you raise your hand with me? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Nice and high. Awesome.